Sign up for a year and pay less than 71 pesos per month. Visit tmt.ph/premium to get your free 30 days of the Manila Times Premium.
A Poised Power powers progress in the lives of every Filipino every day. We power your homes, your businesses, and your communities in a reliable, cost-efficient, and sustainable way. Over the last century, we have been at the forefront of our country's energy transformation, reimagining sustainability and constantly powering a sustained and inclusive economic growth for our nation. Every day, we will keep the lights on, and every day, we are a step closer to a better future with a Poised Power.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Manila Times, I'd like to welcome you to our forum today, Building Energy Security Through Innovation. Now, here in the Philippines, we have unfortunately become accustomed to bad news when it comes to energy. And it seems that hardly a week goes by without news of higher energy costs or energy supply shortages or some manner of controversy. And while those are problems that do need to be solved, the public attention those problems capture often overlooks what are often quite promising developments in the energy sector, and this is what we want to highlight in today's forum. Over the past couple of years, and particularly since the Marcos administration took office, there has been significant progress in energy policy and regulation, in new energy technologies, and in energy market innovations. While it may be a long road ahead, all of these are solid steps towards the goal of finally achieving energy security for the Philippines. These are the things that our distinguished speakers will be sharing with us today, and we're very fortunate that they were able to take time out from their busy schedules to join us. And in addition to our guest speakers, I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners without whom these events would be possible. Our media partner, as always, is the Manila Times TV, and our special partner is Poised Power. I'd also like to thank our organizational partners, British Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines, Chamber of Commerce and Industry France in the Philippines, the Cebu Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Chamber of Real Estate and Builders Associations, the Davao City Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines, the Italian Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines, the Islamic Dawah Council of the Philippines, the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines, the Management Association of the Philippines, the Nordic Chamber of Commerce Philippines, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry in the NCR, the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy, and She Talks Peace. And last but not least, a well-earned thank you to our team here at the Manila Times who makes all of this happen, and as well as to you, our audience today. Now, without further ado, let's get right to it. Our first speaker today is attorney Mona Lisa Di Malanta, who is the chairperson of the Energy Regulatory Commission. She has been a recognized energy practitioner in the Philippines and Southeast Asia, a leader in the power sector, and various other areas. She has been chairperson of the Philippines Energy Regulatory Commission since August of last year. And after 20 years of practicing lawyer in Puyat, Jacinto, and Santos law, she had a brief stint as the Chief Legal and Compliance Officer of Poised Power from April 22 until her appointment at the ERC. Prior to that, between 2019 and 2021, she was the chairperson of the National Renewable Energy Board and steered the multi-sectoral body in laying the groundwork for the country's Green Energy Auction Program, which is a very good program, and updating the 20-year National Renewable Energy Program, among other things. In 2019, together with like-minded lawyers and tech venture capitalists, she co-founded Unawa Asia, an inclusive startup company formed as a result of collaboration between PGS Law, Amihan Global Strategies, and Talino Venture Labs SG. She is also a professor of law at the Ateneo de Manila Law School and a member of the faculty of the Ateneo School of Government, where she teaches courses under the Energy Transitions Program. In April 2021, she completed the Senior Fellowship Program at the National University of Singapore Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And she also holds a Master of Laws degree from the University of Michigan, Bachelor of Laws degree, as well as a Bachelor of Arts with a major in journalism. I knew there was a reason I liked you, from the University of the Philippines. Would you all please give a warm welcome to attorney Mona Lisa Di Malanta.
Thank you, Ben. That was a long introduction. I'm sorry about that. We'll do something about that to not waste precious minutes of everyone's time with the long CV. But good afternoon again, and good afternoon, everyone joining us for this conversation. Thank you to the Manila Times for this invitation. This is a very important discussion that we will have. So let me get right through it. I want to thank you for inviting us to speak first. I like the opportunity of speaking first so that I don't feel the pressure of of following very well-versed speakers. So let me get right through it. This afternoon, we were invited to talk about energy security through innovation. To me, the topic, the title is quite self-explanatory. How can we not talk about innovation if we are trying to pursue energy security, particularly in the Philippines? So maybe I'll take a step back a bit and introduce ourselves first, introduce our agency. So I'm currently the chair of the Energy Regulatory Commission of the Philippines. I'm not alone in the commission. There are 5 commissioners. Our agency is created by law, by the EPIRA, by the what we call the Energy Power Reform Act of 2001. And we have basically a long list of mandates, but we can summarize it in 4. With the EPIRA that deregulated the certain sectors of the power industry in the Philippines, not all, but certain sectors will go through it. The area of the regulator focuses on promoting market competition. Together with that, we are also mandated to ensure customer choice, because in the deregulated industry, focusing into more competition, then consumers are now allowed to a certain extent to choose their own suppliers. So we need to ensure that the playing field is level so that consumers can have an authentic right to choose, or authentic ground to choose their suppliers, and also protect their interests. While consumers are not able to choose, they are part of what we call the captive market. And in that market, the ERC is mandated to ensure that least cost pricing is made available. And if somebody still doesn't follow the rules in that scheme of competition that we continuously monitor, then we are authorized under the law to penalize any abuse of market power. And what is this playground that we are looking at? What is this arena that we are supervising as the sole regulator in the power industry? This is a 630 billion peso industry currently. And if the plans of the Department of Energy, the 20-year plan of the Department of Energy is realized, we're looking at a 7 trillion peso industry that we will continue to supervise, hopefully, by 2040. That's the target. And we do not want to stand in the way of that target. We want to usher in the realization of these targets for the industry. Currently, we have about 327 employees. That's very precise. And we monitor that on a daily basis. For those of you who were monitoring, for example, the budget hearings in Congress, in the House of Representatives, and in the Senate, this figure may be familiar to you, and you may have noticed, how come they're now only 327? They started out, I think, in the House with 345. We keep losing people by the day to some of the players who are in this panel as well, because we compete with the private sector for the very good, very skilled engineers, accountants, lawyers, economists. And we simply cannot match, as a government agency, we simply cannot match the going rate. But we appeal to the nationalist hearts of Filipinos, Filipino lawyers, accountants, engineers, so that they can join us in the industry. Because we want to, in the agency, because we want to do, we are embarking on a transformation of the agency in the next few, as we started it, and we embark on this journey in the next few years. In the meantime, we continue to monitor and issue licenses to currently 227 generation companies operating 590 power plants in the nation, both in what we call the grid, the connected systems, and the off-grid areas. We also regulate one transmission concessionaire. So even if it's just one, they operate more than 22,000 circuit kilometers of transmission lines in the country. We currently have, and this is the exciting part maybe for today, 405 WESM participants. For those of you who don't know yet, the wholesale electricity spot market in Mindanao has already started commercial operations. This number now reflects the updated number of WESM participants. It used to be, I think, 333 participants in WESM. Now, because WESM Mindanao is operational, we increase that numbers. All of those participants are trading every 5 minutes every day. So we also monitor 288 intervals per day of trading in the market. We also regulate 141 utilities, some electric cooperatives, some private utilities. And because we have, as I mentioned earlier, deregulated the supply sector, there are 119 retail electricity suppliers who are able to sell directly to what we call contestable customers. So the ERC, on one side, I won't go through it. It might be too legalese for the audience, but there are various powers that the ERC can exercise under the law, under the EPIRA. We have, as I mentioned earlier, certain sectors that are already what we call competitive or deregulated. So that's distinguished from totally not regulated. It's just deregulated. We continue to issue licenses to generators, to suppliers or retail electricity suppliers. There continues to be the regulated sector, the natural monopolies, those that own the wires and operate the wires, the transmission operator and the distribution operator. Of course, we also watch over the consumer interests, as mentioned earlier. We have two types of consumers in the Philippines: the contestable consumers, those that can choose already their suppliers, and the captive customers who still are supplied by their utilities where they are located. So what kind of monitoring, what kind of things, what kind of mandate, or how do we exercise our mandate? It is really a balancing of interests. And if you see the scale before you, it is an unusual scale. It's not just made of two plates, so to speak, maybe three, maybe more in some instances, but generally three interests that we're always trying to balance at the regulator side. And it's the investor interest vis-a-vis the government interest and the consumer interest. And there are areas where these interests may not be aligned. So it's up to the regulator to find that fine balance where this interest can have points of alignment. And I think the topic for today is one clear point of alignment among all these apparently or on first impression competing interests, because it's to the benefit of everyone that we find that path towards achieving energy security. So it's one area where I love to play in because that's where our interests all align. So I won't go through each and everything on the slide, but we can share the slides to the audience if you find it useful. But let me dive into the topic of energy security. I think Ben wrote an editorial or a piece today on energy security, preparing for this topic, and he identified there are various measures of energy security, what we call the trilemma or the quadrilemma. But maybe in a very simple way, we can measure energy security with the supply, the availability of supply, and the availability of supply, the access, and the maybe and affordability as well. But in terms of supply security, in terms of the availability of capacity, we can see in the slide before you that over the last 20 years, there has been a steady increase of capacity. There may be too many numbers, too busy a slide, but let me summarize it for you. Over the last 20 years, the total installed capacity in the system has increased by more than 100%. If we focus on renewable energy alone, there are more than 3,400 megawatts of new renewable energy that has come on stream over the last 20 years. But in talking about RE, I always have to follow the megawatts with the megawatt hours because the real story is in the generation and not in capacity. So you can see that over the last 20 years, while in terms of megawatts, RE has increased, in terms of generation, there has been a steady decrease actually of renewable energy share in the power mix in the Philippines. And why is that? The answer is also on the screen. It's my teacher mode that's on, but the answer is already on the screen. It's because the utilization of coal in the system has significantly increased by almost 200% over that same period. In the meantime, in terms of the increase in transmission, in the availability of transmission, so that the electrons can be delivered to where it's needed, there has been only an increase of 7.5% over the last 10 years. Our scenario is less than 10 years because that's when the privatization of the operation of the grid has commenced. And this is related to the topic of energy security as well, because as we increase capacity, we need that capacity to be delivered to where it's needed. So this is also crucial. In terms of zeroing in on renewable energy now, in terms of energy security for diversity of sources, we have about 122 generation companies all over the country. Most of them are located, most of the facilities are located in the main grid. I'd like to call your attention to the lower left quadrant of your screen, where we only have 14 off-grid generation facilities. These are RE generation facilities in the small islands. And maybe if you've been following the news, this has a significant, this explains a lot what's happening in our island communities, where they are mostly supplied by diesel plants. And with fuel prices rising, with the price of diesel and crude oil rising, that is a considerable challenge for our National Power Corporation that mainly supplies electricity to this island. I think almost 90% of the supply to our off-grid areas are coming from diesel plants. Now let's talk about energy access, the other aspect of energy security. There are various modes of energy access programs. I'd like to call them energy democracy programs in our systems today. There is the net metering program, one of my favorites, and I'll talk about this more later. There's the retail competition and open access program and retail aggregation as well. We've talked about, Ben mentioned earlier, the green energy auction program, which the DOE is also pursuing for round 2 for this year. Then those that want to source directly from green energy suppliers, from RE suppliers, can also avail of what we call the green energy auction program. This is like retail competition, but purely for retail, purely for RE suppliers. Last year in October, at the ERC, we also issued the rules for distributed energy resources. This is sort of the net metering program, but with higher capacity. So not limited to 100 kilowatts anymore, but 1 megawatt, with the authority to sell up to 30% of their excess capacity to the grid or to the distribution utility where they are connected. We continue to also support the DOE in the competitive selection process for bilateral contracting for captive customers. And as you know, there's already the microgrid law that's also passed in the Philippines to promote rural electrification using hybrid or RE facilities in our islands or unelectrified areas. So all these programs are in various stages of implementation. The net metering program, if I may zero in on that one, is one that really is a program that really deserves its own campaign. And at the ERC, we're really campaigning very hard for the promotion of the net metering program. We have identified champions, we call them champions, to pave the way, give more confidence to others who are still quite hesitant or quite fearful of this program. For national agencies, the Commission on Audit, no less than the Commission on Audit, has actually enrolled in this program. Their entire complex in Quezon City is under now the net metering program, and they can vouch for the benefits of this program for their own agency. So we're very confident that with the COA, the Commission on Audit, who is for most government agencies very afraid to procure services or new ideas because the Commission on Audit might disapprove them. The Commission on Audit has actually engaged in the net metering program, so maybe we can find some confidence in there. We've also identified some local government units that can be the LGU champions, so that we're hopeful that if there are these champions, then they can encourage more of similarly placed end users to engage in the program. But why are we doing all these things? Because we realize that while today there are a lot of areas in the Philippines that still operate under the traditional power system, a highly centralized, unidirectional power system. There are also areas in the Philippines that are already, and this is called future, but I think more being part of the present today. There are those, and we are moving towards this future energy system of no longer unidirectional, but multi-directional movement of electrons, not only electrons, but finances as well. And it's more decentralized than highly centralized system. So our regulations that were formulated under this system may not apply for this system. And that's the preparation that we are doing at the Energy Regulatory Commission. We are already reviewing our regulations to make sure that we don't stand in the way of progress, that we facilitate progress. And the sooner we get to this type of system, ensuring that we are also complying with the mandates of least cost pricing and consumer protection, then we will all be better for it. We are coming up with regulations covering these emerging technologies in the country. These are all in the works, and we are also thinking about different ways of doing things. For example, rather than doing our usual posting of drafts and then engaging in public consultations, maybe we can do regulatory sandboxes and co-creating rules with stakeholders. That's one area of innovation also in terms of regulation that we are looking at. So with that, I hope I gave you enough material to engage in a lively discussion this afternoon. We thank you again for inviting the Energy Regulatory Commission to this discussion, and I look forward to learning from all the panelists today. Thank you, Ben. Giving back the floor to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Attorney. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing that with us. And I hope you'll have some time at the end of our presentations. We'll have some questions and answers, and I have already written down a handful for you. So we'll talk about those things later. But for now, let's move on to our second speaker. Rolando Don Paulino Jr., who is the president of the Philippine Energy Independence Council, or PEIC. Don has 27 years of international senior leadership experience in the energy field and has worked in various places such as the United Kingdom, Malaysia, Australia, and of course here in the Philippines. In addition to his role as president of the PEIC, he is currently the head of energy transition in AC Energy and Infrastructure Corporation and concurrently the president and CEO of Enex Energy Corporation. Prior to this, he was the vice president for Philippine Upstream and managing director of Shell Philippines Exploration. He has been part of various boards, including Pilipinas Shell Petroleum Corporation, Tabangao Realty, Philippine Energy Independence Council, of course, the Petroleum Association of the Philippines, the Malampaya Foundation, and Filipinas Shell Foundation. And he's also a past president of the Petroleum Association of the Philippines. He is also a fellow of the Institute of Corporate Directors, a fellow of the ASEAN Academy for Engineering and Technology, a trained executive coach, and a part-time faculty member at UST Graduate School and the DLSU Mechanical Engineering Department. He has a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Santo Tomas, a master's in business administration from Ateneo de Manila, and has been part of Shell's business leadership program in INSEAD. When he's not working, he's busy with his personal projects on renewable energy and technology, photography, cycling, and in coaching future leaders. Please welcome Don Paulino.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Quite a generous introduction, so I'll make it also shorter, as Attorney Dimalant puts it earlier on. So let me just share my screen, and hopefully we can clearly see. Just doing a quick sound check. Can you hear me, and can you see the screen?
Yes, you're fine. It looks good. Sounds good.
That's great. Okay, so Thank you very much, Ben, again, for that generous introduction. So what I'll try to do today is just look into energy systems as a whole, and really reflect on a couple of things, particularly how do we need to think about innovation in energy, what are the level of collaboration, and what are the shifts in mindset that we need to look into. And to start that, let me just show this photo for you. For a lot, this does not mean anything. And this photo was taken when I visited one of this facility in British Columbia back in September. So what this equipment does is that it captures carbon CO2 from the air, separates the CO2 or concentrates the CO2 from the air, and then that CO2 is mixed with hydrogen that you get from the water, and eventually it becomes synthesized as either aviation gas or other fuels that can be used actively. Now, for me, when I was visiting this, I was really in awe, because for me, what I've seen there is really engineering technology and engineering innovation in action. And it actually promotes the thinking that, look, we can actually produce fuel through the reduction of CO2 in the environment. But when you start going to some of the details on this and start thinking, is this really possible? The company has been doing the research, Carbon Engineering has been doing this for around 12 years now. And they're starting to be ready to scale up in the next coming years. But when you think about the challenges that they have, is that this is a very energy hungry or electricity hungry facility equipment. And you need to be able to be carbon neutral. You need to be able to use renewable energy. It uses large tracts of land when you start really operationalizing it. And in terms of affordability and the economics around it, for it to be justifiable, you need a carbon price of around $300 per ton. And right now you're talking about in the region of even $3 to actually $20 per ton. So quite a lot of challenges that is being faced by new technology in order to actually address that issue on climate change, the energy security that we're facing now as a result of the Ukraine, and also that transition from using fossil-based fuel to actually a much cleaner fuel. And if I reflect back on that example on carbon engineering, it feels like all of these arrows are actually pulling one from one another, because there's always this challenge that if you try to actually start using much cleaner energy, then the cost will also go up. And we have experienced in Ukraine that the supply of fossil fuel was disrupted, and how energy security become a very important factor. But we know that to hit 1.5 C2, we started to need to think about that. I need to actually shift my thinking. I need to shift my energy usage to actually hit and contribute to climate change. And therefore, the thinking that I have is that instead of arrows pointing outwards, maybe the thinking should be arrows pointing inside. And actually thinking that all of these things, that climate change, energy security, and energy transition are one and together that can actually form a system. And let just me give you some examples that this thinking can be applied for. So what you're seeing here is solar panels. And if you look at it, solar energy is one of the most easily accessible type of renewable energy. It's been that solar panels prices are going down, and a lot of companies are starting to build one. I mean, quite a number is happening here in the Philippines, and Attorney Di Malanta pointed that one out earlier on. Now, the question with solar energy is that, especially for a country like the Philippines, is that it takes 1 hectare per megawatt of energy that you produce. So meaning you will have to eventually compete with farming and other usage of land if we want to rely on renewables such as solar energy. The second one on solar energy is that it's intermittent. So when there's no sun, there's no energy that can be produced. And with our system too in place, whenever there's a sun, that doesn't necessarily mean that our transmission system can actually transfer that energy from one place to another. And again, and I think the question really is, how do we actually time shift it? And then the last question is, by putting in solar energy, are we actually converting some of our farmlands into power plants that actually uses solar? Now, in Germany and in other places, what they've started thinking of is maybe they can actually cohabitate. I can continue to actually produce the energy that I need in using the solar panels, but at the same time can actually continue to produce produce that can be put on the table. And in fact, for some of the farmers, they said, look, the shade of the panels actually helped me grow my shrubs and my berries much better. And for me, if you go back to this example, this is where the arrow starts pointing in. Because putting in the solar panels, thinking about how to use the land more effectively and efficiently, actually contribute to both the security and the affordability of electricity. Now, as an opposite example, I want to share what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. I mean, in introduction, I used to be part of Malampaya. Now, if you look on the news, there's always an issue whenever Malampaya is shutting down. And I mean, this February, there's in the news that Malampaya will have its regular maintenance for a couple of weeks. And immediately, people's thinking is electricity prices will go up. And then also this question, do we have enough gas to last in the future? But for me, the question is, are we actually optimizing enough what is really available in the West Philippine Sea? Now, the way we have looked on West Philippine Sea for the last decades is always look at it as postage stamps. So we have one small field development here and there. I mean, Malampaya itself is a single postage stamp. But if you look on the map, the service contract of the map of West Philippine Sea, there's a lot of overlap. And the thinking that we need to look into West Philippine Sea is that, can I actually use the whole of the West Philippine Sea and look at it instead of a postage stamp as a counterpane or a counter sheet of all postage stamps and develop it that way? The question will be, will it be affordable? And will there be investors to actually do it? And I think this is where the challenge across the business that we are all in. And that's really the challenge of how do we shift our mindset in terms of how do we do things? Because if we keep on thinking postage stamps, especially here in the Philippines, rather than a counter sheet of stamps and really think about how can we actually have all of these systems to work together rather than compete with one another, then we will continue to be not attractive to energy investment. We will not continue to have all those levels of people coming together to actually do something difficult. If you look at the example I gave at the start about carbon engineering, those are multi-billion-dollar investments. but a number of big companies are also investing on it because they believe that carbon management, carbon sequestration in a different way rather than pumping it under the earth could be actually a viable and an important part of our energy system in the future. And I think this is one of the messages I want to share here is that the Philippines, if you look at it, has quite a diverse source of energy, or have quite diverse sources of energy, from renewable down to geothermal, and down to also having fossil fuels like gas and diesel. I think we need to look at it in a more systemic basis rather than trying to say one is not is against one another, but look at it on the needs of our country, and also look into it whether our current tradition of using just a single grid system, as Dr. Attorney Di Malanta pointed out earlier, is still the valid. We also need to make sure that whilst there's a lot of competition with different companies in the energy business and in the overall Philippine environment, I think there are common points of interest where we all can collaborate, including doing some of the more difficult areas and difficult activities, such as working on really trying to mature the West Philippine Sea, or looking into how can we actually make the energy systems in the Philippines more robust. And I really hope by doing that, we can be more efficient. Efficient in such a way that rather than competing heavily, we're actually using some of the strengths of each of the organizations to actually maximize the system. We also start promoting really for our people at the very lowest level that, look, what we need to think about here in the Philippines too is not just about what individual organizations or companies can actually do, but collectively, how can we actually be efficient also in our energy usage? If you look at the learnings in the UK or in Europe during this Ukraine war, they were able to actually reduce their gas consumption by 20%, just driven because of the need to actually make them more efficient and more effective use of their gas. And I think this is something that we can all do together in the Philippines. So it's about really thinking more holistically, having a healthy combination and really collaborating and really trying to drive one another to be efficient. I think it's really time for us to behave differently. And I would just like to leave you with a quote from George Bernard Shaw, which really resonates a lot to me. He said that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. Unreasonable one persists to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Maybe it's time for all of us to start becoming unreasonable. Thank you, and back to you, Ben.
Okay, thank you for that, Don. You towards the end of your talk there, you spoke to some thinking that's become very close to my heart. So after our other speakers, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I have some questions for you as well. But right now, we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is the Aboitiz Power Chief Investment Officer, Joseph Lacson, who I just met about 2 weeks ago. Joseph joined Aboitiz Power as its Chief Investment Officer just last August, and in this role, he leads all the investment efforts from seeking out best opportunities for the company and assessing and negotiating on the various deals and projects that they are taking a look at. Prior to joining Aboitiz Power, he served as the Chief Investment Officer of Metro Pacific Investment Corporation, where he spearheaded the company's move to diversify from traditional infrastructure deals towards a more digital approach. He has a vast experience in strategy and business development and has worked in various industries such as consumer goods, fintech, healthcare, and infrastructure development. He's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania. There's somebody else that I like, where he completed his postgraduate studies. He's also a Baker Scholar from the Harvard Business School, where he received his MBA. Would you please welcome Mr. Joseph Laxon?
Thank you very much, Ben. Good afternoon. First off, big thanks to the Manila Times family. Thank you for having me. Chairperson De Malanta, Dawn, and other panelists, good afternoon. Look forward to interacting with you and learning, and to everyone out there. Magandang hapon at maraming salamat. Let me speak on the lens from the lens of an energy group, right, in the Philippines that, as you probably know, is quite heavily invested in the success of the energy systems in the Philippines. So I'll go through a few slides just to bring you up to speed of what Aboitiz is and what we are today. I've certainly been working with the group for a while, not directly, but I've been following them even through my days at MPIC. But it starts with really our purpose, which is transforming energy for a better world. And so that serves as our mantra, as our guide for everything we do. And I think it's important to note that, as I'll go later, the dilemma or the trilemma or the quadrilemma of what we do with energy, where we invest, what we focus on next, really puts that to a test. And ultimately, the big question is what we're doing transforming energy for a much better Philippines, for a much better planet Earth. So next slide, please. So just to give you a recap of what we do, we're in power generation. We have 49 power plants all across this archipelagic nation. We have 8 power distribution companies, including the second and third biggest one. We have a distributed energy business. We have a retail electricity services. So I might dare say we're involved in most, if not, most of what makes up the Philippine power industry, right? So that's allowable. Next slide, please. This is on public record. We have time and time again reiterated our commitment to have 4.6 gigawatts of clean energy by 2030, a significant increase from where we are today. And that brings us to about over 9,000 megawatts or 9 gigawatts by 2030. And certainly, just extrapolating going forward even more. Right? So that is in tune with what the country needs for its development, for her growth. We see the great demand, and we are prepared to work lockstep with other industry players, with the government, with the regulators, with the consumers to make that happen in a way that allows for affordable, reliable, and sustainable power for each and every Filipino. Next slide, please. So our portfolio is committed towards becoming, shall we say, better mixed by having a 50-50 mix between renewable and, shall we say, thermal power. We realize that's not an easy transition. There are, as you can imagine, significant considerations, financial, operational, certainly environmental, community-wise, social, that need to be taken effect. But we are committed to seeing that through. I think you are seeing a rush by a lot of my fellow industry players towards that space. And that is actually good. Right? It's pointing us into the right direction. But it isn't easy. That journey isn't easy by any means. Next slide, please. Yes. So what are we hoping to see, right? Yeah, I think from a wish list standpoint, and I say this as an industry player involved in all of them, and I dare say others in the industry wish for the same things, right? One is a responsible energy transition for the Philippines. It isn't enough to say that we're going to transition, but we need to do it in a way that takes into account all the realities and all the aspirations of the country and of the planet, basically. And it basically means that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, right? What happened in country X at time Y need not apply here. So we need a responsible, orderly transition for the Philippines, a bespoke transition, right? There are historical facts to consider. We've contributed very little to what's happening in the climate in the past. We haven't really modernized in many ways in industrial fashion. So we need one that's just for the Philippines, right? That ties in with our economic, sustainable, social aspirations. A second is to have all options on the table, right? Putting a straight jacket on our efforts, I think, isn't one of the things that gives us the best outcome. Yes, we can learn from others, but that doesn't exclude us. That doesn't include certain options that we need to look at. And I think we need that wide lens approach, that big picture approach, rather than start off with limits on ourselves if we're to move forward. It's going to take a lot, right? It's been described as having a bucket of bullets, really, to solve all the problems in the world in terms of energy and sustainability and climate. And so having all options allows us to really look and pick the best ones for us rather than be hampered from the very start. A third is a well-functioning transmission system. I think this is a challenge globally. It is exacerbated, no doubt, by the nature of the Philippines' geography. But everyone wishes for a well-functioning transmission system. I think that we've got stranded assets. We've got some areas that we need to connect to the grid. So there are a lot of these realities that the regulators, the government and private sector, the users are looking to improve. And so we hope and we pray that becomes a reality, right? Because it's got a multiplier effect for all of us. And lastly, addressing this trilemma. Again, I think that referred to, right? Sustainable, affordable, reliable. Addressing this trilemma and balancing the different needs, priorities at different times, I think is a reality that we will have to address. Next slide, please. So what does that lead to? It's basically a predictable, de-risk, investable, positive energy system that benefits the consumer, right? So it has to meet all those areas. It would be folly to think that addressing one area, say reliability at the cost of affordability, will be a viable option. Addressing affordability, but not addressing the sustainability needs is not an option either. So it's a greater challenge for all of us, and which is why the industry, and by that I use the big I, which includes government, users, NGOs, industry participants, you, the investors, and others, have to be really, really spot on in terms of choosing which investments to make and what not to make. And knowing that these investments have great 25, 30, 50-year lifetimes, right? That's impact goes beyond what we will probably see in our working careers. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that was it for my planned presentation. Just a couple of notes in terms of innovation, and I'll just throw it out there, right? As an industry participant, I think Chairperson Dimolanta talked about some of the innovations in terms of regulations we're seeing, and that explains the great growth, the tremendous progress being made in all facets. Dawn talked about what we might learn from the Canadian experience and the impact, and just changing the innovation on the West Philippine Sea, from postage stamp analogy. I'll offer about three from our perspective that we're looking at. One is data innovation to improve the running of our plants, right? Certainly higher availability factors, outages that are better managed, both planned and avoidance of unplanned outages. Better performance there contributes greatly to the energy security of the country. And it goes without saying that more energy available, if we can save up 1 or 2% in terms of availability factor, that will mean a lot, especially during the moments when we believe we might be facing some supply crunches. So that's something that the Avoidance Group is committed to and has invested in over the past years. And we're starting to see the benefits of that using data analytics, big data, etc., to improve the performance of our plants. And we're quite pleased about that. A second example I might raise is battery energy storage systems. We just launched one first of our 12, really. This one in Davao, right, on a floating platform, nonetheless, right. And that really allows us to take energy when there's a surplus, store it, and release it when it's needed. And that, I think, will help address many of the needs that we have, right, or some of the challenges facing renewable energy sources. So we've done that. We've committed to growing it significantly. We're at about 50 megawatts now. Ambitions at least 250, if not more. And so we're delighted about that. That's a product innovation that we're looking at, right, in terms of it. Third, I was going to talk about net metering, but I think Chairman Milanta and the example in the COA hit it spot on. It's a great example. We'd love to have that. I think derivatives is another. But what I want to talk on is really the virtual power plants, right? Really bringing in all these distributed energy resources and putting them together collectively as a whole, and better managing the output, the inputs, so that it contributes to the whole grid. Those are some of the innovations that we are looking at. I think some of you may have seen news about nuclear as well and all that. So we as power players are looking at all of them. We're investing resources. We are constantly weighing these options out and looking at them. So it's an exciting time to be in the industry. I leave you the thought. I think Don talked about George Bernard Shaw. I'll go with one as a frustrated historian. One of my favorites, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. He of the Great Western Railways, the steamships, and the great bridges and tunnels of the UK, right? Will we need one to really drive innovation in the Philippines, right? We often believe in this messianic complex that it takes one person to go and change things, right? Yes, you can. But what's more likely to happen is it's going to be a collective effort between government, private sector, investors, foreign and domestic, the public, right? To really make it happen. And we create our own Brunels, our own innovations, right? That drives security, energy security for this country. It won't be easy. There will be starts and stops. The line between innovation and lunacy might be a thin one, right? If we repeat the same mistakes, we're doomed to that to get there. It hasn't stopped us, but what we have to do a much better job is really learn from these things. Why didn't it work last time? What can we do? What can we refine, right? And those are the things that we're committed to doing. The Aboitiz Group is committed to driving energy security for the country in partnership with everyone. And, we're committed to investing, right? You just do the math, right? An extra 4.6, getting to 9.2 gigawatts is going to require a lot of money, a lot of careful money, a lot of smart money, but we are committed to that because that's what the country needs. And so that's our promise to the country. Thank you. Back to you, Ben.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. I have a few questions for you afterwards, and I want to ask you some things in conjunction with our next speaker, who is kind of a pioneer. I would say he may want to argue with me about that, but I would characterize him as a pioneer of distributed energy here in the Philippines. We're going to find out shortly what that means. Charlie Ico, he is the chairman and president of WeGen Philippines and a native of Sevilla, Bohol, where he had got his career start as one of the youngest mayors in the country at the time, back in the late 1980s. After politics, he left and joined the NGO community in Bohol and became one of the central figures where he brought his experience in politics, development, and rural finance. He graduated from AIM and he briefly joined the private sector as a business development consultant, but has always been pulled back towards more community-oriented work, such as being the founding president of Habitat for Humanity in Tagbilaran, and the JCWP project director of that site in 1999, and eventually became the CEO of Habitat Philippines. Then switching to the renewable energy sector, which is where he caught my attention a couple of years ago. He joined WeGen Laudato Si Incorporated in 2017 and has led the company for a couple of years and has some exciting things, at least as far as I'm concerned, some exciting things to tell us about. So why don't you take it away, Charlie?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben. Perhaps I can share my slide if you can hear. Okay. Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see that.
All right. Okay. So thank you very much for that introduction. Actually, it was my stint in the housing sector. I spent around 17 years in the housing sector, especially for the socialized housing, where part of our responsibility is making sure that the families we assist would have electricity as a basic service, and I found that it was a problem then. Anyway, thank you very much for this very important forum. Let me quickly, I like the definition of Attorney Di Malanta earlier, but I agree in IEA definition of energy security. They focus on uninterrupted availability of energy sources at an affordable price. And the second one that I'd like to show is in the PEP, technically our demand, as they projected, would double every 10 years. From 15.2 gigawatts in 2020, it will be around almost 30 by 2030 and 54.6 by 2050. And very important is the projected energy mix of RE and non-RE is 35% RE by 2030 and 50% by 2040. So if we look at it from the other side, it means that by 2030, we will be dependent, 65% of our energy mix will depend on imported fossil fuel, 50% by 2040. So from the risk perspective alone, in terms of supply and price, these are two things which are not within our control. Now, very recent experiences that we had, in December 2021, Typhoon Odette wrought a lot of damage in Surigao, Bohol. I was there in Cebu and also in Leyte. And then 2 months after, we had the war in Ukraine, where our fuel prices, like diesel before was less than 50 pesos, all of a sudden it was almost 80 pesos. And then April of 2022, we had Typhoon Agaton, which damaged significantly the transmission lines of NGCP in Leyte. And very recently, only January 20 this year, NAPOCOR says that it might have to reduce power services in missionary areas by 50% or more, simply because of the price of fuel. So there are various risks to our energy supply, which prevents us from having energy security, whether it is geopolitics or in the Philippines, because we are always hit by disasters. We have more than 20 typhoons. So there is always that problem. So I'd like to share a personal experience. As I said, I was having my Christmas vacation in Bohol, happily in December 16 when Typhoon Odette hit it. And we experienced what a total system breakdown means. We did not have access to the generating plants because we are connected by a Leyte and Bohol submarine cable. The hydro plants, small ones in Bohol, were all flooded. The diesel power plant in Tagbilaran was out of commission. The power barge in northeastern Bohol had very low capacity, but worse than that, there were people who owned generating sets, generators, but we had no supply of fuel because the barges from Cebu to Bohol could not operate because the ports of Cebu and ports of Bohol were damaged by the typhoon. So in terms of the source of electricity, we just don't have it. And then in terms of transmission, it was heavily disrupted. So I said, the towers that connect the Bohol-Cebu submarine cables were badly damaged, and it took months to repair that. And then NGCP lines were destroyed. On the local scene, even if we had power, the distribution lines of the local utilities were also severely damaged, and power lines were cut off. And from December until late April, we didn't have a lot of power in Bohol. Gradually, it was restored, but it was a case in which not only one component, like we lacked supply, not only transmission, but the whole thing simply was lost. And so that's, for me, that's an extreme example of what's the meaning or the implication of a lack of energy security. By the way, because we didn't have power, we cannot withdraw from banks. They were all offline. We cannot use our credit cards because they were also offline. We didn't have refrigerator. We had to go to the market every day, and then add to that COVID. So it was really very difficult. So as Simon Sinek says, innovation is not born from dream. Innovation is born from the struggle. So we had to find a way to have power. So what did we have? We had batteries in our cars, And so we bought DC to AC inverter. An example here is 100 watts. We connect it to the battery of our car, and at least we can power our homes from 6 o'clock until 9 p.m. So that we can cook and have dinner. And then once we already had, we can already go to the gasoline stations. We gas up when our battery power was almost consumed. Then we have to start our engines and use our alternators and do that. But the point that I'm saying is this. Actually, we have an opportunity to innovate because we are facing a problem. If we are not facing a problem, there's no what's the motivation for us to innovate. Now, so talking about innovation, we already have the technology. It was mentioned already before, like solar is the most affordable. And the good thing about solar is that it is predictable. At least it will produce. It is intermittent, yes, but we know that it will produce power during daytime. Okay, and we know what time will that be? 6 to 6 maybe, or 7 to 5 during the day. It is very flexible on where you are going to put it, how big it would be. So you can have a large 400 megawatt solar farm like what ASEN has in Palawig, Zambales, or you can have a 1 kilowatt in the rooftop. And the good thing about it is the warranty of solar panels is already 25 years. And once you install that, there is no fuel supply risk. It will continue to operate as long as the sun is there. So in other words, we have the technology. It's now a matter of how to use it best, where to use it. From my side, my bias is I look at it from the customer perspective. We are a very small company. We focus on assisting the customer to have more energy independence. Now, the other two parts of our basic energy structure will be transmission and distribution. So how do you address that? So our solution is to produce power near the place where it will be consumed. So it could be home solar, it could be a community solar. And by the way, there are now grid-forming microinverters that can operate even if in off-grid mode. It is even without batteries. So what you do is your supply chain of electricity from a long generation transmission distribution, you can compress that by putting your generation in your rooftop or in your stream farm, in this case in Jensan, or in an island like what we had in Bohol, and then you can produce your own electricity. The moment you have that, by the way, I'm talking from my personal experience. After Typhoon Odette, I installed a 5 kilowatt hybrid system at home. Practically, I'm now energy independent. I can switch off my DU. I have not applied for net metering yet because of the long requirements that it entails, but I don't need the power from the DU. I switch on the DU just in case I would like to add, power to my additional air conditioners. But generally, I can go off grid. So, innovation will ultimately lead to disruption. And I'm very, very happy that Attorney Di Malanta mentioned this, that this is actually the future. And as the other speakers mentioned, we all have a role to play. I think big companies can focus on large solar farms, large wind farms, and small companies, we can focus on, individual consumers, individual houses. I had a meeting last Monday with the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development because I inquired about their pambansang pabahay para sa Pilipino, where their target is 1 million homes. And then I told them, you know what, with 1 million homes, one house, I can install just 3 solar panels at 500 watts each. 3 solar panels, that's 1.5 kilowatt per family. With 1 million homes a year, if you are successful, you can generate up to 1.5 gigawatts of power from the rooftop of all these buildings. Even if you build an MRB, the size of the MRB, the footprint of one single MRB is at least 30 square meters. And that 30 square meters can give you 15 solar panels, which is actually enough for maybe 5 homes in that tenement, in that MRB. But being a housing agency, they were not thinking about power. They were thinking about housing. And I think from the DOI side, being an energy agency, you are not thinking about housing, you are thinking about energy. I think fortunate for me, because I came from the housing sector, I said, oh, here is an opportunity. If these people can just install 3 panels each on their house, it would help reduce the demand from the grid. And so while all the big players can add from the supply side, we can work in tandem with them by reducing the demand. And I thought I did a financial model. I said, what if you borrow at 9%, which is what DBP is charging now, for a fixed rate of 5 years, renewable to another 5 years, how will it look like? So I said, if I am from Manila, I'm paid 12 pesos per kilowatt hour to Meralco, okay, does it make sense? And I found out that yes, it makes sense. I can still save 14% to my power cost. And my budget for electricity would pay for, my savings would pay for the system. What if you go in the province and then the rate is 16 pesos per kilowatt hour? Your savings would increase from 67 to like more than 70%. And your LCOE is 475. Now, during that meeting of the Department of Housing and Human Settlements, I learned one thing. They said that, you know what, the government is providing interest subsidy to those home buyers of the Pambansang Filipino Housing Program. And do you know how much they're going to pay? It's only 1% interest, so that the house will be affordable. So I said, fine, if you put solar in all the rooftops of those 1 million homes and they pay only 1% interest, and you amortize that for 25 or 30 years, like you amortize the house, then the incremental cost of the solar component of that is very, very low. But what they save is more than 50% or up to more than 75% of their electricity expense, which is significant, which can help them pay off for this loan. So in other words, we have to tie certain things together. So the last one is the innovation. My problem was, I said, how am I going to encourage my employees to go solar? Because it is also expensive and I cannot finance it all from the company. And so we approached a bank and told him, okay, can you allow our employees to borrow so that they can install solar in their houses? And then through salary deduction, they're going to pay you. And we had an agreement with that. And in fact, I'm paying 7,000 pesos a month for 18 months for a 5 kilowatt hybrid that I have installed at home. So this is an example that, like, we can start with Manila Times or we can start with Abuitis to make sure that all our employees will have the solar and they would have better energy security through packaging it and through salary deductions. And I think there are other examples that can do that. So anyway, thank you very much. And I think this is a very interesting journey that we can work together. Thank you, Ben.
Okay. Well, thank you, Charlie. We'll come back to you after our next speaker. And let me. I hope John doesn't mind. Let me share a little background here on how I became acquainted with our next speaker. About 3 years ago, I received an email, I think it was, originally. I had written on the commodities market, or lack thereof, here in the Philippines. And John just happens to be in the commodities business, and what he's doing here is a very specific piece of the commodities business, development of an electricity forwards market, and I'll let him explain what that means. And since then, since we first got acquainted, it has been 3 years of watching this creeping progress towards this, what would be a really wonderful innovation, both for the industry and for all of us who get an electric bill every month. And it seems that we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel as far as that journey goes, and that is very exciting news. And I'm glad that he has finally made it back to Manila, and has some time to share with us today. John is the CEO of Green Tiger Markets, which has developed a cloud-based marketplace for wholesale hedging of Philippine electricity prices. And as I said, he'll tell you what that means in a moment. He started successful companies in a variety of industries around the globe, including Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and the U.S. He was recently featured in the top 100 magazine innovators in the Entrepreneurs issue, and has about 20 years experience working in finance. Was managing director and head of U.S. natural gas trading for Goldman Sachs in New York, a senior trader for DRW Commodities in New York, and CEO and co-founder of the ABAX exchange in Singapore. Is recognized by Trader Monthly magazine in their top 30 under 30 issue, and has won multiple awards from Risk magazine for liquidity provision and risk management in the U.S. natural gas market. He's a graduate of Princeton, where he earned a degree in operations research and financial engineering with certificates in finance as well as engineering management systems. He's an avid outdoorsman and likes to explore the mountains and oceans when he isn't focused on markets. And I certainly hope that you have had a little bit of time not to be focused on markets, because we have plenty of both of those things here in the Philippines. Welcome, John. It's good to see you after so long.
Yeah, Ben, thanks so much. It's really great to see you as well. It was almost exactly 3 years ago today that we met for the first time. So, and my partner Carlos and I think we were on the last plane out of Manila before the pandemic hit. So, but in that subsequent time between when we were here last and last week, we've made some tremendous progress with Green Tiger Markets. And I'm really thrilled to be here today. This forum's great. I really appreciate the other panelists' presentations so far, and I'm excited for the group discussion. But I guess I'm happy to present a little bit about Green Tiger Markets and some of the issues we think are facing the Philippines electricity market, and our solutions. So I guess without further ado, let me share here, and we can get going. You're able to see this okay?
There we go. Yeah, it's working good.
Perfect. All right. So building energy security through innovation. I think innovation is the key word here in the title, and it's not invention. And that's an important distinction, particularly for Green Tiger Markets, in that what we've been focused on is not inventing anything new. Instead, we're taking some of those brilliant inventions from some as many as nearly 150 years ago, and applying them to the Philippines electricity market. So I grew up outside Chicago in the shadow of Modern Markets, which was the Chicago Board of Trade. And that's where the corn contract was developed in the 1850s. And so from a kind of a cultural perspective, Chicago was a real markets town. So it was kind of in my blood from early days. So, but yeah, when it comes to innovation, I think there's a lot of opportunities to apply the lessons of energy markets from the U.S., Europe, Australia to the Philippines market. So when we looked at the Philippines market originally, we saw that there were kind of three critical problems. One of them was affordability. These figures are from recent prices of the Philippines versus some of their regional competitors. And that price of electricity really matters when it comes to competitiveness. When foreign firms are thinking about setting up in one of these countries in Southeast Asia, the energy cost for some industries is the primary factor that's driving the decisions. So if the Philippines is more expensive or substantially more expensive than their competitors, that's going to put them at a significant disadvantage. So affordability is I think problem number one. Problem number two in the Philippines electricity market is a problem of volatility. The spot market for electricity in the Philippines is one of the most volatile spot markets that I've ever seen in electricity markets, and just a volatile spot market generally. And in 2022, in just a short period of time 2021, for a fairly short period of observation, we saw prices that had basically a 10x range over the observation period. That makes it really, really challenging for businesses to make decisions if they don't know what the price of their electricity is, or it changed by a factor of 10 in a really short period of time. So that volatility issue is a big problem. And then lastly is this issue of reliability. I've only been in town for a short period of time, and in a lot of the conversations that I've had, and actually bringing up these pictures, this is more the rule as opposed to the exception in terms of the experience of Filipinos in the last decade. That yes, these pictures, this is a part of their life. So not necessarily on a daily basis, but it does happen, and this reliability issue is one that does need to be addressed. But all of these three problems come back to essentially this chart. And we pulled this from the Department of Energy presentation from a number of years ago. The chart basically hasn't changed, but essentially the Philippines market is short generation. And obviously firms like Avoides have plans to build a significant amount of generation. It's much needed. It's obvious to, I think, the local residents that the market is short generation. But the question in my mind comes, how does the world how does the Philippines attract between 50 and 100 billion US of capital, of foreign direct investments to build this roughly 45 gigs of generation that the Philippines are forecasted to be short by 2040? That $50 to $100 billion could flow anywhere in the world. But how do they know to send it to the Philippines? Which brings me to one of the projects that I worked on at Goldman Sachs. So in the early days of my career, we were approached by ConocoPhillips. ConocoPhillips wanted to build a offshore drilling platform that was going to be somewhere around 200 miles off the coast. They were going to be drilling to search for natural gas and crude oil. And ConocoPhillips was was very confident that they could build the platform and that they could extract the oil and gas. The problem they had was they didn't know the price that they would receive for that oil and gas once they extracted it from the rock. And so ConocoPhillips contacted Goldman Sachs and said, hey, what will you pay us for this forecasted production over the next 10 years? And, it's a challenging question to solve. Obviously, we could have generated some sort of supply and demand analysis and expectations for the marginal cost of production. But we had something at our disposal that allowed us to vastly simplify putting a price on natural gas and crude oil in the future. And that was the NYMEX. And so the NYMEX is the New York Mercantile Exchange. It subsequently was purchased by the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. But when I first started trading natural gas, the NYMEX was the place where essentially all energy products or energy futures were traded. So they had natural gas, crude oil, heating oil, gasoline, electricity, basically anything related to energy was traded at the NYMEX. And the NYMEX was, if you look in here, you see essentially kind of a big ring. And all of it was primarily men, but all the men standing around would either be traders or brokers. And it was called open outcry. And the price of oil and natural gas was determined basically by this mass of bodies at the NYMEX. Now, there's something interesting that's going on here in this pit. Well, actually, there's two things that are really important. The first one is price discovery, and that is the trading that is happening for whether it be oil or natural gas. It's determined basically by the collective wisdom of all those individuals and all the orders that are flowing into that pit. But price discovery is basically when buyer and seller meets and price is determined for a good. So that element of price discovery allows for price risk transfer to happen, as well as the generation of what we refer to as a price signal. Price signals are extremely important. They are the guiding information for industry participants. Those price signals, when the price is high, that sends a signal. When the price is low, that sends a signal for certain actions to happen, particularly when it comes to commodities markets. So speaking of forward prices, when they're high, and as it relates to the electricity sector, investors add to new generation, whether it's solar or geothermal or solid fuel based. If an investor knows that the price is high for the product that they're going to be producing, capital is going to flow in there. Alternatively, when prices are low, investors tend to put capital into kind of the other side of the spectrum, which is the consumption side. And if prices were very low here in the Philippines, we might see additional steel mills show up here in the Philippines, or other energy intensive industries. And the ability to build large, spacious shopping malls, for example, that do consume a lot of electricity. But the mall operators are willing to do that because they know that the price of that electricity is low to keep that facility cool. Now, there's an issue when forward prices are uncertain. And we at Green Tiger Markets would argue that the forward price of electricity in the Philippines is extremely uncertain. And that lack of a price signal has a demonstrably negative impact on the development of electricity infrastructure in the Philippines. And so if investors don't know what the price of the good that they're producing is going to be, it's very challenging to make that investment. So in response to that, Green Tiger Markets, what we've done is, and as Ben pointed out earlier, we've built a cloud-based trading platform to allow Worrisome market participants that are sufficiently capitalized to participate in a over-the-counter bilateral market to allow them to hedge the price of electricity. So if they're a generator, they can go and enter into a hedging transaction where they sell. If they're a res or a DU or a bulk user, they can be on the other side of that transaction. And we've worked with a number of market participants to develop these standardized contracts. They're financially settled. And these contracts reference the load-weighted average price final as provided to the market by Worrisome. The market structure that we are proposing is essentially identical, and this is where sort of the innovation aspect comes in, essentially identical to the way that the forward market in the U.S. Originated in the mid to late 90s. And so we're taking the lessons learned there and trying to apply them with a little tweak to the Philippines electricity market. And so, the obvious question is, hey, why does this matter? But, when thinking about that 45 gigs of generation that needs to get built roughly over the next 20 years, there's a significant number of jobs to build those power plants, to build additional transmission lines, and to then once those facilities and transmission are built, there's a number of jobs that are in the services industry, just maintaining that infrastructure. But think of all the potential new manufacturing jobs that could come to the Philippines if firms were able to lock in some of the most attractive prices for energy. And think about the economic growth that would happen in the Philippines if we're just able to unlock that roughly 2 trillion PHP of investment. And then obviously from the government perspective, the larger economy is going to generate more tax revenue to allow for more services to be provided. And obviously, the standards of living of the average Filipino, if energy prices are lower or more stable, that will most certainly result in a increase in standard of living. But I think the real risk here for the Philippines is that they get left behind by the local competitors, and this difference in cost of electricity could be the factor that separates the Philippines from their competitors when it comes to gaining investments in additional, whether it be manufacturing jobs or just industries moving to the region. And that's a big risk to take. But it's one that's definitely solvable. It has been solved in other countries. And we're Green Tiger Markets, and we're here to help. And with that, Ben, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, John. We've come to the fun part of the forum, as far as I'm concerned, which is the discussion part. But I'll start with you since you're right here, John. One question I have, and I've tried to explain this to people. You've given me a very good explanation of it, on several occasions. So I wonder if you could tell people what the benefit of I think when people hear, we try not to give them the impression that if you get this forwards market launched, it's going to make their power bills go down. And that we know that that's not necessarily the case, but it will have a benefit to consumers. So could you give us the elementary school version of why this is important to consumers, and why they should be enthusiastic about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when, you mentioned, hey, this forward market gets launched and my electricity bill is going to go down. The evidence actually is quite supportive of that happening with respect to a reduction in volatility in the spot market. And when that volatility goes down, mostly because the commercial market participants are able to lock in their economics ahead of time, it de-risks the business model of the generator and the consumer. And so the generator requires a lower risk premium to charge for their for the goods that they're providing. So that reduction in volatility, I can see Joseph shaking his or nodding in agreement over there. And though the average or realized price that a firm like a Boyde's might receive for their electricity is lower, they're able to lock it in on a more consistent basis and turn their power plants essentially into a bond as opposed to a risky physical option on the electricity market that needs to be optimized on literally on a 5-minute basis. So the reduction in volatility will certainly over time, not on day one, but over time, generally results in lower prices. But what the real function is that it's going to reduce risk, and it's going to allow for the risk to get transferred from those that have it to those that need it. And when that risk gets transferred, uncertainty comes out of the market, and a general calm or a more reliable calm comes over markets.
Okay. Well, here's a pertinent example, and I know that this is something that Attorney Mona has been dealing with quite a lot in the last few weeks. When we have situations where, there are power supply agreements or there are retail electricity supply contracts, and then all of a sudden there is a sharp increase in the rates that are charged against that contract, or at least an attempt to make those rates much higher because there was a problem with fuel prices, over the past couple of months or whatever. What you're putting together will help to eliminate that kind of situation. You won't have these big surprises, which end up falling to us as consumers, when Meralco or, our co-op or whoever says, hey, we've got to raise your rates by, a peso a kilowatt hour or whatever. Is that a good example?
That's accurate. The design of the contracts in that they are financially settled, and they are an agreement between two parties, where the only thing that's exchanged is a payment at the end. So there are no megawatts that are exchanged through the life of the contract. There's no concern for the fuel price or the FX rate or a force majeure of a plant. Ultimately, if a firm is able to pay, they pay. Obviously, some firms occasionally go out of business. That happens. And they typically go out of business when they owe people a lot of money. But referring to the situation that happened just a few months ago, that does not happen with the financially settled contracts with the market structure that we've designed.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Now, I have several questions for each of you, but I want to take a slight detour here. Our new business reporter, Micah Arceo, has forwarded a question to me, and I would like to get her covered because she's under a lot stricter deadline than I am usually. So we'll help her out. What she would like to ask all of you is, despite the crisis that we're facing with the energy sector right now, in particular, comments from Energy Secretary Latilia recently that the first half of 2023, or particularly the summer months, the country's power situation may become difficult, at least in terms of supply. We may be looking at red alerts and, rolling blackouts again. With that potential, are you confident, are you optimistic that the government and the private sector is doing enough now or over the next couple of months to handle that potential crisis? And do you see this as a situation? And we go through this. We seem to have gone through this every year since as long as I've been here, and it's been a long time. Do you see that improving with what with what innovations and reforms are being done now, or is this going to be something that is going to take a few years to to overcome? I see you nodding, Attorney Mona. Would you like to jump in on that one?
Yes. I'm happy to get the ball rolling on that very important question. I think the question is whether are we doing enough. In situations like this, it's very hard to say that there isn't enough. The problems that we face are something that we should have prepared for 2, 3, 5. In the case of Malampaya, I don't know, Don, how many years ago, something that we should have prepared for. So the question of enough, I think, is something we need to settle with ourselves, that it's not going to be enough if what we're looking for is just something in the near term. But definitely something in the midterm and the long term, we are doing. Not that we are doing enough, but we're doing everything that we can. But for the immediate, we are doing a lot. For the near term, you mentioned, Ben, this perennial problem of the summer months, and in one talk, I was actually very wishful that it will be a different summer for us, maybe next year. But this year, we're definitely doing more. So it's not enough, but we're doing more. And I'd like to take off from what Sir Charlie mentioned earlier, that maybe because of all these things happening, we are now forced to look at innovative techniques, innovative ways of doing things. Maybe now energy efficiency is no longer just, a nice to have. Maybe finally we will realize that it should be part of our energy planning and our energy system. So I think it's a very challenging time, but it's also a time of lots of opportunities for all these things that people have for years been saying as something we should look at, to finally be something we all take seriously. So that's for me. I'll stop there. We can go into the details later, but I'll stop there in the meantime.
Okay. Well, I'll make a quick follow up to that question with Joseph. Since you're the big generation sector, as far as Aboitiz is concerned, what's your very short term outlook? How are you looking for the next 4 or 5 months, first half of this year? Are you guys in good shape? Do you have any new things coming online soon? I know that you have a lot of stuff in your pipeline. Is there anything that you can divulge that the public could look forward to?
Sure. Thanks. And I think thanks. It was Micah. Right? I think it's a timely question. Right? We were delighted that we were able to help fulfill Meralco's needs for 300 megawatts, right? And that came from our new 1.3 gigawatt GNP Tinginan plant. And we've always said that we are there. I can tell you that a lot of people are talking. A lot of people are working very hard, so that the public, so that the nation has the power it needs during the summer months. I think I can tell you that. We see from our viewpoint a lot of hard work being put by good people to address the needs. We are in talks with the stakeholders, with Meralco, with government, and all that. We note Secretary Lutilia's call for everyone to cooperate, the ERC's call, Chairperson De Malantos, and we're part and parcel of that solution. The talks are ongoing, I would say, and I think that we to echo Chairperson De Malanta's thoughts, right? It's never enough. It's more is always good, right? And it's a dynamic situation wherein if there were more, you'd use more. But at the same time, we're doing our share now. Plans are not built overnight, right? As you well know, and they don't materialize from thin air, right? It's a long process involving thousands of people, billions of dollars over a span of sometimes decades. But what we look to optimize. I talked about data innovation, getting our plants up and running as best as they can, outages as efficiently, as short, or as scheduled, and all that. So all these things have to happen. So the short answer is we're working very hard. I guess you would have to ask Meralco what their outlook is. They see much better perspectives on it as they see the whole franchise area, Metro Manila. But we come to the forum. We came to a reasonable agreement with Meralco the last time, and should they come again with the call, with the need, with reasonable terms, we're more than happy to answer the clarion call. Right, we stand ready.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, this is a potentially touchy subject, but I think it affects all of you in different ways, and a couple of you have mentioned it. And it's been a subject that's been kind of at the front of my thoughts for a while. But the one serious handicap that gets mentioned a lot is the development of the grid, and I don't want to pick on NGCP, or Transco in particular, but they're the only show in town, and so they're in the crosshairs here. You pointed out that the expansion of the grid has lagged far behind the expansion in generating capacity. Charlie in his talk, discussed how quickly, what a thin thread that is for some places, and how quickly that the whole thing can fall apart. There are other issues there, and I think Don mentioned it, but yes, it is a global problem, particularly with the expansion of renewable energy. Grids, not just in this country, grids cannot seem to expand fast enough to connect everything. Is there? I know there's not a silver bullet to that, but is there a direction that that you could be looking in? Is there a change in approach to grid development? Is it perhaps time to have a second grid operator, perhaps, or to break up? Now I know John, being from Texas, has experienced has experienced the benefits and the drawbacks of having a grid that is separate from the major network. But is something like that a possibility here in the Philippines, rather than trying to have a national scale interconnected grid? Is it, would it perhaps be better to, split, have a Mindanao grid, have a Luzon grid, have maybe several in the Visayas? This is a country in pieces. It seems to make sense. How do you get the grid to keep up with the other developments?
I'm happy to take a stab at that. So, coming from Texas, we obviously were in the news maybe about 2 years ago or so, when we had a tremendous snowstorm that had a devastating impact on the grid. With respect to the Philippines, there was a question right there at the end about should Mindanao have its own grid, Visayas its own, and Luzon its own. I would argue no. That interconnecting them builds grid stability. There's excess generation in Mindanao. There's opportunities for increased development of hydropower down there, and then just exporting those electrons north would have a very positive impact on the grid stability. But there's a significant infrastructure and transmission that needs to get built to fully realize that. But when you first started asking this question, my initial response actually ties right back into the title of this forum, and that's innovation. We're seeing a tremendous amount of innovation worldwide right now in storage technology, and batteries, when placed appropriately in the grid, basically on the other side of the congestion, allow for grid stability to be maintained without actually increasing investment in generation or transmission. But batteries right now are expensive, and so the price of the batteries needs to come down. I know there's a number of companies that are looking at solving this problem. I think it is going to be solved within the next decade, and I hope it is, because actually energy storage is probably the biggest problem that we could solve right now. So, or at least in my view. So, solving it with storage takes away the need for, essentially doubling the transmission capacity to go along with the doubling of the generation capacity. And maybe I'll pause there.
Okay. Well, since you brought up energy storage, I'd like to get our engineer back into this discussion, because one thing I know, Joseph, you mentioned the Boites has been developing some battery storage capacity too. But one thing that I kind of worry about with that is that it seems there's a potential resource bottleneck. Batteries, and this applies to other, to other components of renewable energy too. We're using some relatively exotic materials that are not available everywhere, and some of the places that they are available from are kind of problematic. So is there, how big a risk does that pose, first of all? Is there, is it foreseeable that could be a real roadblock in years to come? And are there ways around it, other alternatives, other technologies that are potentially useful, rather than, say, your standard lithium batteries? What do you think of that? And I also want to ask about the carbon capture and usage thing too that Don mentioned. So Don, what do you say about that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So Ben, it's a bit multiple questions. So the question is about the battery in terms of technology, but also the material usage. And then the other part that you mentioned is about the relevance of carbon capture in the future, right? So I guess from a battery perspective, I think what is happening in the industry nowadays is really quite a range of development. Whilst the traditional one, the lithium ion phosphor systems continue to dominate what is available in the market, there's a lot of ongoing research too that allows to use a different type of materials in the system. And I think this will evolve throughout the next decade, which hopefully enables sustainable battery usage in the future. Now, I guess the question that always plays into my mind is related to your questions on the grid. Is it a grid-based type of battery solution, which means large batteries, or is it what Charlie mentioned earlier on, that look, maybe given the Philippine structure, island-based, smaller whole housing community, will it be hybrid battery systems or hybrid energy systems installed at home? And really, I think that's the challenge. That's why I mentioned it. It needs to be a systems thinking. There could be application where the large battery storage needs to be installed in the grid. But in islands, in some houses that we have here, the solution could be a hybrid energy solution. I mean, in my case, I've already shifted to that. And for the last year or two, 90% of my energy is produced on my own using both the battery plus the solar. And I live in Laguna. I can connect to Meralco if I want to, but I said, look, the system generation is thinning. I better contribute to the grid by producing my own power. And that's why I think that the Philippines needs to look at this in a much wider scale, because I don't really think that it's just saying, look, we'll have a centralized grid or we have a microgrid. I think it's something we need to find the right ratio and the right area of application around it. Now, from a carbon storage perspective, I think this is a global issue that needs to be looked at, because if you look on what's the trend, COP27 said, look, we're not going to hit 1.5. In fact, the range is 1.8 to 2.4 in terms of temperature. And for it to happen, something different needs to be done, which is really capturing more carbon other than the nature-based, which is the trees, and the current carbon storage system. Now, the technologies that are now available, I feel, based on what I've seen, will not be commercially viable at the start, well, within this early part of this decade. But I'm really hoping that on the back end of the decade, they actually become useful. Now, for me, the question now is where to best locate it, because those are energy intense operations, and therefore you need sustainable, reliable, and also large renewable sources, because the way you will run it is that you will run it whenever there's a curtailment in the grid and there's extra capacity in the system to allow you to use up whatever the system is actually providing.
Okay, I see. I had heard a little bit about that project that you had seen, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. And lately I've been researching hydrogen, and it was kind of tangential to that. And so, I was curious, as to what the potential for that in maybe the next 10 years or so, because it's a better system than just pumping the carbon underground. You'll never build enough plants to be able to do that, to make a dent in the atmosphere. You also mentioned about the West Philippine Sea and the exploration there, and that obviously that is an extremely fraught issue, and has just lately come up in the news with the Supreme Court ruling. First of all, I mean, since you're familiar with that industry, first of all, is there any part of that patchwork map that is within secure enough boundaries that we wouldn't have to worry about dealing with China, to explore for gas and oil? That's my first question. And my second question is, do you, if you do, they would probably make you king, but do you have any recommendation to how they could get over the obstacle to actually be able to do some exploration, because we know it's out there, we just can't get to it. What do you think?
Yeah, it's you're right. It's a frothy issue. I was trying to avoid talking about it in the past, but I guess it's coming to a point now where
it's hard to avoid. I mean, it's in front of us all the time. So maybe we can figure it out.
Yeah, and that's why I said I want to be unreasonable at this point. So your first question is really about, are there areas that are secure enough, meaning much closer to the economic zone of the Philippines? I think there are. You can anchor it in the north with one of the service contract there is service contract 57, and then maybe on the south and it's service contract 55, which are more inboard as opposed to more outboard to the contested area. So I think those are, for me, those are two potential areas that we can start really looking at. Now, I know people will say, look, this is a fossil fuel, but in the end, we will need to continue using gas as a bridging fuel. It's a case of whether we import or we actually produce it on our own. Now, this will take time. Now, your question is how can we actually develop? So this will take time to develop because a lot of the development here are on deep water, and there's limited expertise available across the oil and gas industry on deep water. It's quite expensive, and it will take a number of years to develop. So normally it takes between 5 and 8 years from the time you explore to actually get your
right.
gas. Now, so what are the things that we can do? So the first one really is about really across that patchwork is anchoring it in two areas, because Malampaya will continue to be there. I see those two areas, SC 57 and 55, maybe has an anchor point where you can start doing the initial seismic and the development or doing exploration wells. Now, once you have done that, maybe worthwhile using that now as your really assessing the whole of the West Philippine Sea and look at it and say, look, maybe this is not just the potential, there's a bigger potential here other than these two anchor points, and package it in such a way that it will attract bigger players. Now, the formula I just mentioned to you is not any different from what companies like Petronas or other regional national oil companies do. They actually, what they do is they look and package their oil and gas systems, their reservoir, and package it in such a way that becomes attractive to bigger players. And I think that's we're now at the stage that we start doing it that way. I guess the other part is really getting clarity on our geopolitical situation that itself has disrupted the development in the oil and gas industry. If you look on when we started Malampaya back in 2001, nothing has happened substantial ever since. And really one of the main blocker there is really people or the investors are not confident enough that they can put, once they start doing the drilling and doing the investments, they can actually continue with the whole development. Because remember, the investments in the upstream oil and gas are in the hundreds of millions of dollars and even billions of dollars. And it takes quite a substantial number of years before you start earning money around it. And therefore, it's really a high risk, high reward type of investment. And therefore, the fiscal and the geopolitical stability becomes a very important part of the consideration of investors.
Yeah, right. Because if the investors can't invest in exploration, and production, then other investors who would have the terminals, and the transportation won't be willing to invest, and then the generation companies like Aboitiz and First Gen and whatever won't be willing to invest in building a power plant to use it. And so, there's a whole bunch of dominoes that fall. We have just a couple of minutes left, but I want to ask a question of Attorney Mona. This was in our editorial today. I happen to know where the editorial came from, but I'm not going to say. And it was something that Charlie also mentioned too, with his experience in apparently not successfully being able to register for the net metering. But we know that it does work well. We got the the outcome from the COA. You mentioned earlier that the seems like the limitations have been, either eliminated or raised a bit, up from the 100 kilowatt ceiling that was put on it. Is that the case? And is there a way to make the registration process easier, or to otherwise incentivize customers from joining the program? Because as the editorial pointed out, it has been, since the very beginning, when it was, first proposed, it's been 10 years, but you have, fewer than 8,000 customers for it. And most of those have just appeared in the last couple of years. I think you want it to expand. I want it to expand. The paper wants it to expand. And I think a lot of customers would be interested in it. But so how, what's the next step to do that? Particularly since you've just lately put out the rules for the DER to help that expand, and the two things I would think go hand in hand. So what's the next step? What's the ERC looking at?
Okay, thank you, Ben. Definitely the net metering program that has the 100 kilowatt cap is mainly catered or designed for residential consumers. So, and then there is a desire among the commercial and industrial consumers, but their consumption is higher than that requirement. So, the DER is really the program where commercial industrial consumers can participate in, because it has currently that trial limit, and I must emphasize that is a trial limit of 1 megawatt with the 30% cap on what you can export. We will review that after the first 2 years of implementation of the rule, so that we can validate whether there is really a desire to, or a need to either lift the cap completely or increase that 1 megawatt cap to maybe 2 megawatt or whatever is necessary at that time. So that's in terms of the first question that you raised. But in terms of the next steps, we are really pushing for a very aggressive campaign for net metering. And I mentioned earlier having champions on the national agency side, the LGU side. And the champions are not just there to as trophy, so to speak, to say that, it worked for them, maybe it will work for you. The champions, especially on the LGU side, are really working champions. We're working with the Pasig City LGU for right now for this one-stop shop approach for net metering registrations. I commiserate with Sir Charlie, actually, because several years ago, I also engaged. I also enrolled in the net metering program, and it took me more than a year. That was 7 years ago. It took me more than a year to have my facility registered. And that was the time when I had to pay for a distribution impact study just to have my 3 kilowatt peak facility registered. There's no requirement anymore to pay for a distribution impact study, but the process can still be further streamlined. So at the ERC, we're continuing to revisit our requirements. But what we have heard as feedback is that some of the delays are at the LGU level, because there are requirements for electrical permits and other inspections. So we're working with local governments and the utility, in this instance with Pasig. We're working with Meralco, so that we can set up a one-stop shop in the Pasig City City Hall, where consumers can just come in. They don't have to move from office to office to get their permits. They can just process all their requirements in one place. And hopefully, once we have successfully piloted this program, we can roll it out with other local government units. So we have a plan to really increase the uptake net metering. So on the office side for buildings and government offices, but also in the residential area where net metering is really, there's really a huge market for net metering there. And that's why I like also what Sir Charlie mentioned about the financing, because that's one hurdle we still need to cover for net metering. But there are already some options. We're developing some programs also with partner LGUs, because LGUs, there are progressive LGUs that want to provide financing for their residential consumers. We just need to work on the details of the programs, and also GFIs, government financing institutions, that can develop this particular product for those that are interested in net metering. So there's reason to really be optimistic for these types of programs, DERs and net metering.
Okay, well, on that note, because that is the note that I really would like to end on. Of course, we could talk all afternoon, but that's I think is important. People should have a little optimism about what is going on. There are problems to solve, but there are also some good solutions being put forward. And I think with that, the clock says that it is time to go. I'd like to thank each of you very much for joining us today. This was very, very enlightening. And there's, like I said, there's so much more to talk about, but I know where to find you. So we'll be in touch. Once again, thank you all. Thank everybody that joined us in the audience today. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or any comments about it, you can put those to the Manila Times Facebook page, or comment on some of our articles in the paper, and who knows, I may just answer them. Thank you, everybody, and until we meet again, so long.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Poised Power powers progress in the lives of every Filipino every day. We power your homes, your businesses, and your communities in a reliable, cost-efficient, and sustainable way. Over the last century, we have been at the forefront of our country's energy transformation, reimagining sustainability and constantly powering a sustained and inclusive economic growth for our nation. Every day, we will keep the lights on, and every day, we are a step closer to a better future with Poised Power.
Sign up for a year and pay less than 71 pesos per month. Visit tmt.ph/premium to get your free 30 days of the Manila Times Premium.